Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Simon Kaner. I'm the Director of the Centre for Japanese Studies at the University of East Anglia, and I'm the Executive Director for the Sainsbury Institute for the Study of Japanese Arts and Cultures. And a very warm welcome to all of you to this first online interdisciplinary Japanese Studies research webinar brought to you by our newly configured Centre for Japanese Studies and our colleagues at the Sainsbury Institute for the Study of Japanese Arts and Cultures. It's wonderful to have you with us. This afternoon, we have two extraordinarily special guests at either ends of the time spectrum. We have Dr. Paula Curtis, who I'm going to be calling on in a little while, who's over in Yale. And we have Dr. James Morris, who's joining us from the University of Tsukuba in Ibaraki in Japan. So it's early morning in Yale and evening in Japan. So thank you in advance to both of you for giving up time at the extremities of your days to be with us here in Norwich. And we're also going to hear from all of the many of the members, the academic members of the Centre for Japanese Studies at UEA, because I'm aware that we've got a wonderful group of people listening in, including hopefully some of our new students on our brand spanking new master's program in interdisciplinary Japanese studies, who I had the pleasure to meet in person on campus yesterday. And we also, I believe, have some of the participants from our online summer program in Japanese cultural studies, which we ran this summer in late July and early August. It's wonderful to have you back with us again, and there'll be some familiar faces and I think some new faces for you. And what we're going to be doing in the first part of our webinar is talking a little bit about the online summer program, how we assessed it. We've got a wonderful report which has been put together by my colleague Tracy Hearn, supported by Chris Hayes and Ollie Moxham and Ryoko Matsuba, who we'll also be hearing from a little bit later on. And then this is just a chance for us to launch that report, which we are going to place on both all the websites that we've got access to, and we'll be sending out details of that on social media as well. And we'd very much welcome any feedback that you might have on that report, because we're going to be using it as the basis for planning our next online summer program. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that at the end of this hour. We're very much hoping to be wrapped up within an hour. So by 2 o'clock British summer time, we will be signing off, and we have a lot to get through in that time. I should just say that I hope you're all doing well. We're obviously horribly aware that the pandemic continues to rage around the world. I'm pleased to be able to tell you that here in Norwich, we now have students on the campus at UEA, and we only have 1 or 2 cases reported at the moment. So we're not seeing any of the draconian measures that we've seen on some other British university campuses at the moment. And we are able to be teaching in person, which of course is what we all really want to be doing. But our theme today is taking Japanese studies online. And I'm very much looking forward to the discussion a little bit later on, because obviously it's on everybody's minds this year. There's been a huge amount of preparation to make sure that we can offer everything that we need to online. And as we found with the online summer program, I think we found that there were actually all kinds of benefits to doing things online as well, not least, of course, reaching out to a truly global audience as we're able to do this summer. So without any further ado, I'm going to introduce you to Tracy Hearn. Tracy is working with us at the Centre, the Sainsbury Institute. Tracy has a long and very distinguished career as in charge of recruitment for UEA's international office in Japan in particular, but in many other parts of the world as well. And so Tracy brings a great deal of experience to some of the things that we were trying to do around Japan and Japanese studies, and has been a great figure in the Centre for Japanese Studies ever since we were set up about 10 years ago. So Tracy, I'm going to hand over to you for an introduction to the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simon. Good afternoon, all. What a pleasure it is to talk to you today. Thank you again for joining us. As Simon said, my name is Tracy. I've been working at the Institute since February now, I think, and really enjoying being a part of what is a really excellent team. So I was tasked with compiling the online summer programme report, and a report which hopefully you've all kind of had time to read through and enjoy. And so for the next 5 minutes or so, I'm going to be sharing a few highlights of that report with you. Before I start, I'd just like to acknowledge the contribution of my CISJAC colleagues, Chris Hayes, Ollie Moxham and Yoko Matsuba, amongst others really, who all contributed content and data to the report. And of course, you did such an excellent job of organising the programme. So the online programme was an ambitious project for the Institute in many ways. It was developed under challenging remote circumstances with new technology and a very limited time frame for organisation and promotion. So it was fair to say that we were all delighted with the response. We certainly hadn't anticipated that we would receive over 350 applications, and that those applications would come to us from over 50 countries worldwide. It's quite amazing, really. One thing I would like to mention is that the report specifically measures country of domicile. Unfortunately, we didn't measure nationality at the outset, but we know that we have nationalities represented beyond the country list detailed in the report. So I think this really highlights the global appeal of Japanese studies and the importance of CISJAC in facilitating global learning and discussion in the field. Whilst it was wonderful to receive high numbers of applicants from Eastern European countries where CISJAC has a number of pre-existing connections, we were equally delighted to see such a large cohort from the States engaging, particularly large numbers from India, as well as really strong pockets of interest and engagement from Mexico, for example, Malaysia, Nigeria. These are all previously unexplored regions of collaboration for CISJAC. And all this has given colleagues lots of ideas and thoughts for new global oriented activity and engagement work for the Institute, which has been really exciting. And I think looking to the future of CISJAC becoming more global, I think is really going to be a continuing theme. The majority of our participants, many of you who are with us today, were students mostly of all levels, all the way from first degree right up to a number of PhD candidates, followed by researchers, lecturers, and teachers at different levels. However, we were really pleased to see professionals engaging from all sectors, including international development. We had journalists, people working in conservation, in healthcare, tourism, all people really demonstrating a strong personal interest and connection to Japan. To make the programme as inclusive as possible, we did not require a background in Japanese studies. All were very welcome to attend. And yet the largest proportion of participants demonstrated a very strong and credible background in the field. In fact, 40% of participants had more than 3 years experience, which was wonderful. So anyone who has ever hosted an online course of this type will know how difficult it can be to maintain high levels of engagement throughout that programme, especially for what was a particularly intensive programme of study. However, the average engagement rate for the majority of sessions over that 2 weeks was well over 200. And in total, 185 of our participants completed all the core elements and received a final certificate. And this also included submitting a 3-minute Pecha Kucha presentation on a topic of their choice. And you're going to hear a little bit more about how wonderful those presentations are later in the session. So, in terms of impact, there's no doubt at all that the online summer programme really enhanced recognition of Norwich as a major centre of interdisciplinary Japanese studies with a focus on arts and culture. The Sainsbury Institute has seen a real increase in social media engagement, in web traffic, in subscribers to our mailing list, and of course the number of inquiries that we've been receiving for our fantastic new MA in Interdisciplinary Japanese Studies has also increased. So really, in conclusion, the Sainsbury's Institute is well placed to develop further online programmes, and with the generous support from our funders and our supporters, we will be able to extend our reach and global engagement to bring Japanese cultural studies teaching and researches to new audiences worldwide. So before I finish here, I'd like to just read one or two participant quotes, if I can, just to capture the impact the programme has had on some of our participants. So when we asked, how do you think your experience of the online summer programme will impact your future? Here are two really nice responses, I think. Firstly, it has given me a better glimpse into how to shape my own research by paying attention to areas I hadn't considered before, and it has also tempted me to join the MA. And secondly, well, I wanted to see what Japanese studies is about in order to decide whether I would like to pursue a career in this field. At the end of the programme, I decided I would like to study Japanese studies at university. So I think that really sums up, I think, the kind of impact that the programme has had on our participants. Thank you all very much for listening. I hope you got some things out of that. I'm going to hand back now for the next speaker. Thank you, Simon.
Thank you very much indeed, Tracy. And we've got a lot to pack in this afternoon, but our timing is probably going to be a wee bit flexible. But we're going to move on now to our two keynote speakers. So it's with very great pleasure that I'll introduce the first of those, who is Dr. Paula Curtis from Yale University in the United States, where she's with the Council on East Asian Studies. Paula is not only a very distinguished medieval specialist of Japan, but has been taking the lead on initiatives like digital humanities in Japan, and has this summer has put up a whole series of really interesting papers on the future of Japanese studies, as well as earlier on promoting ideas about what one can do with a BA in Japanese studies. So I'm going to hand over to Paula now. Thank you, Paula.
All right, hopefully you can see my screen. Someone confirm that for me.
Yep, we can see that nice and clear. Thank you.
Well, thank you for joining us virtually today, everyone. And especially thank you to Simon and to the Institute for hosting this event and offering the invitation. There is a lot that could be said about taking Japanese studies online, whether we're talking about remote learning or the role that social media plays in going public. But today I want to talk a bit about the virtual roundtable that I hosted over the summer and how it can prompt us to think about access and equity in Japanese studies. At the Association for Asian Studies 2019, there was a roundtable entitled The Death of Japanese Studies. And as you can imagine, this was a very provocative topic that drew over 100 attendees to the panel. And it began some really important discussions about how Japanese studies itself has changed over the decades. And the panelists talked about things like shifting geopolitics, the rise of China, limited departmental resources, lacking specialists in their particular geographic area. There was a lot that was covered. But afterwards, a lot of the people that I spoke with really felt kind of disappointed. The roundtable had featured primarily senior scholars from large elite institutions, and many attendees didn't feel that their experiences in Japanese studies were represented fully, or they felt frustrated that the discussions tended to be focused about complaints about what was in the past, rather than constructive thoughts about what is or can be in the field. And with this in mind, I didn't want the death of Japanese studies to be the final word. So I created a complementary session, The Rebirth of Japanese Studies, that was focused on the voices of diverse early career scholars and aimed to generate discussions not only about the state of the field and precarity and academia at large, but also how we can share advice with one another about potentially enacting positive change. So after our complaints, what are we going to do about it? When the 2020 conference was canceled, we decided to move the event digital. Rather than hold a video conference, we converted to an online form that allowed people written responses. Both the submissions and the format have important implications. So let me start with a brief summary of some of the points that writers raised and then turn to why the format itself was so crucial. The responses were diverse, but many people debated how we fundamentally define Asian studies and Japanese studies and how they're evolving based not only on things like geopolitics, but also on the demands of departments, which also often ask us to be specialists on all of Asia in their teaching and increasingly in research. And this really has a lot of implications for how we train graduate students in the kind of work that they're encouraged to do and how that translates into the classroom. While some participants urged us to think more transnationally and globally about how we approach Japan, others expressed concerns that this could result in a kind of Asian fusion syndrome, where historical and cultural differences become collapsed into a monolith Asia. And this issue was also brought up in how we re-envision undergraduate teaching to help students understand the particularities of Japan while using that as a lens to engage with global perspectives and see how their own identities in fact impact the way that they view other cultures, and then how these skills then become transferable. Another recurring theme was the necessity for more international exchange, much like the program here at the Institute. Venues like AAS bring scholars together from all over the world, but they're very much North American centric. And of course, a lot of people discuss problems that aren't unique to Japanese studies, such as the nature of job applications or abuse of contingent positions that can leave some of the most innovative early career scholars in poverty conditions. Discrimination and imbalances at conferences, publications, hiring based on race, gender status, and other categories is an ongoing issue that only really has just begun to be discussed a lot more openly. And while it's true that everybody in academia is facing this, I think it's also essential to have this conversation within Japanese studies circles because we are a community of scholars and educators and students who are connected to and capable of supporting each other. And holding this event was not just about adapting to pandemic times. One of the benefits about going online was being able to reach a wider audience. Discussions at conferences rarely ever move beyond the event. In the first couple of days, our initial panelist statements had over 2,300 views. And in turn, it also created a space with more equitable access to that information. Many can't afford to attend big conferences in the US, or they have responsibilities that make it difficult to take time away. So going digital gave us a way to engage more people and build in flexibility in a time of global pandemic. And we also let people post anonymously. A lot of students and pre-tenure scholars hesitate to speak up in academic spaces since they never know if the criticism will affect their careers. So a virtual format also allowed comments that could be anonymous, but then also cited in the future. Issues in the field are often spread primarily through word of mouth, and they go nowhere unless someone personally takes up advocacy. But with a more sustainable foundation for that information, people can now reference it, send it to administration, use it to develop grants, or take other types of concrete action. But it's important to remember that while incredibly valuable for understanding the diverse challenges in our community and brainstorming support, the roundtable was also very revealing of enduring inequities. The responses that we had indicate the problems that we have with representation in Japanese studies. Of the 41 roundtable writers, more than 3/4 were white and just under half were women. Only men posted multiple times. Only 2 people who identify as Japanese or Japanese American took part, both employed in the US. And despite our best efforts, the US, UK, and Canada dominated the conversations. So there's really a greater need also to hear from Japanese scholars and other international scholars about the state of Japanese studies. And all of this is not to say that the contributions we had were not valuable, but there are still voices that need to be elevated and experiences that need to be centered in our conversations about change and the field. In my closing remarks of the roundtable, I stated that the first step has to be for us to reflect on our own privilege and our positionality, whether we're senior faculty, librarians, or graduate students. Understanding our positionality helps us to understand what we can do. And taking this event digital was one way to begin that conversation, to share it widely, to urge forward momentum, and to gain greater awareness of our circumstances and that of others, which provides greater ability to have real allyship and hopefully usher in this kind of rebirth in Japanese studies. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paula. My goodness, that's a lot of ground to cover in a very short amount of time. And thank you very much for sharing that link with us. And I know that there are some questions starting to appear in the Q&A box, and I would encourage our audience to be asking questions. That way we can address those once we've heard from our second speaker, James Morris, Dr. James Morris, who's joining us from the University of Tsukuba. where he's a specialist in Japanese and East Asian religious history. But on top of that, I've got to know him as the editor-in-chief of the Digital Orientalist, and I've been able to take part in one of his Twitter conferences last year, and my colleague Andy Hutchison was able to join in one of those conferences this year as well. So James, over to you.
Wonderful. Hello, everyone. 1 second. Great. So I will be introducing you to the Digital Orientalist and the sort of work we're doing at the Digital Orientalist over the next 5 minutes or so. You may be familiar with us, you may not. I don't really know how we're categorized in the broader world. I imagine some people consider us to be a blog. We consider ourselves to be a weekly periodical or magazine. We were founded in 2013 as a blog which primarily focused on Islamic studies and digital humanities. And come 2018, we began to transition into a wider publication. I was brought onto the team alongside several other editors of different subjects. And last year, I became editor-in-chief. We affiliated with the American Oriental Society. And due to quite large growths in readership over the past 3 years, we've been able to sort of expand quite rapidly. So this year, our editorial team has 20 members, and we cover around 13 different disciplines, including Japanese studies, but not just Japanese studies. So I'd like to explain sort of a little about our philosophy, and then I'll look at what we're doing specifically with Japanese studies things. So Digital Orientalist sort of has two simple ways to view it. We focus on low-level digital humanities, and we focus on the experience of ourselves as researchers, students, librarians, archivists, curators, etc. And what I mean by low-level digital humanities is we're not focusing on large projects. We're sort of focusing on how digital tools can help us in our everyday work and help increase our workflow. And this is reflected in how we've approached Japanese studies over the past 2 years, 2.5 years. I have basically been the only person contributing on Japanese studies. Paula did contribute a piece with her colleagues earlier this year. And generally, the sort of content that we've been producing has been tutorials, reviews on software, applications, databases, and some basic programming. And all of this, I hope, reflects that low-level digital humanities sort of philosophy. So I will find tools, I will find apps which I'm using in my daily life, and I will share those on Digital Orientalist with a wider audience. Now that's sort of where we've been until now. But this year, because the team has expanded quite a lot, we now have editors in areas which are quite closely related to Japanology. So we have a Buddhist studies editor, we have a Mongolian/Manchurian studies editor, we have Korean studies editor, we have a team of sinologists, and we're hoping that the content that these editors produce is also going to be applicable to our readers who are primarily interested in Japanese studies. And this sort of gets to the essence of Digital Orientalist. So personally, I don't see myself as a digital humanist. I'm a historian, religious scholar, I don't really know, focusing on Japan, but I happen to use digital tools in my research. At the heart of Digital Orientalist is the idea that African studies, Asian studies, Middle Eastern studies, and oceanic studies are united to some extent by the fact that none of our research areas rely on Latin scripts. So the hope is that through working across all these disciplines, we may be able to find solutions to common problems. So as a Japanologist, I hope that through reading perhaps Jonathan's contributions in biblical studies or Ephraim's contributions in Syriac studies, that I may see things which help me within my own research. I guess that's sort of the aim. And I don't know if it's been clear until this year, because we were much smaller until the end of this summer. Some projects have come out of Digital Orientalist, and Simon mentioned one, which was our Twitter conference, which we run every year. There are also publications. Cornelis van Lith, who's our founder and owner, has made several publications based on Digital Orientalist. One of them is his book. I will share a link to it after. And there's also a paper which we produced last year, which sort of gets to what I was trying to explain when we were looking at this slide, perhaps much more clearly than how I just explained it now. And I'm just going to talk very briefly about where we're moving forward over the next year. So we're hoping to move forward in three areas, really. We're hoping to professionalize, and there's three ways we are looking at doing this. One is to sign a DOI to every publication in Digital Orientalist, and the reason for this is we found that people are starting to cite us in academic publications, and it's much easier than for them to cite us if we have a DOI. Copyright policy. We're looking to change leadership structures. This hasn't been announced yet, and I don't know the details, but basically me moving back and allowing new editors to take on the role of running the publication. We're looking at diversification. We're very happy with how we've diversified so far. There's a lot of work to be done, but we're happy that we're now covering 13 different disciplines. We're happy that just over 50% of the editorial team are women. We're happy that about 40% of the editorial team are non-white. And we're happy that about half of the editorial team are from outside of North America. There's a lot of work to do, but we're hoping to diversify further over the coming year. And finally, we're looking at making an edited volume together. It's in the early stages at the moment, but that's something we are hoping will be completed this academic year. So sorry, quite rushed, but I look forward to being able to answer more stuff within the questions. Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, James. That was absolutely brilliant. And maybe we could invite James and Paula to come back and join us again. And we've got three questions that have cropped up in the Q&A box. I'm aware that we're sort of approaching 1/2 the hour, but I very much want us to be able to spend some time. So I think we'll sort of take another 5-10 minutes or so. We can reduce down what we were going to do in the last 10 minutes or so. That's not a problem at all. Just to sort of to tackle these. So there's one from Gianfranco Chico, who I know joined us for the summer program, as I think did James Loftus over in Fukuoka. And Gianfranco asked, so did research and other work that used to be in presence and hands-on in Japan somehow adapt or happen remotely due to lockdown, or did it all just come to a halt? And what if limits to travel are extended, and how can the Japanese studies community move forward without being able to visit Japan? Now, this is the second part of that question in particular, I think is of great significance to all of us. I know personally I've had, I think it's been 3 trips to Japan have been put off so far, and I'm not anticipating being able to return until it'll be 2021, probably possibly summer 2021 at the earliest, I should imagine, and that is having a major impact on what we're doing. But maybe, and if we just have a quick look at James's questions as well, one of which picks up from Gianfranco, what can we do about data collection without collaboration and support from our Japan-based scholars? Are there things that we could be doing there? How are we going to encourage new collaborations for early career scholars? And this is something that's very close to home for us as well, because we've got students and researchers lined up ready to go to Japan, and from the UK at least they're not allowed to go at the moment, although we gather that the restrictions are just starting to ease up. So maybe perhaps we can sort of hear from both James and Paula on those topics just for a couple of minutes each, and so then we can obviously pick up on more questions later on if they come in.
Sure,
maybe,
I can. Oh, sorry. I was going to say, I can speak as the person outside of Japan right now. I would say that digitization is one of the core things that we have to think about right now for what will happen if the travel limits are extended. And in that, the most critical thing we need to think about is how we collaborate with our librarians, because they are the people who are negotiating all of this with Japanese databases, Japanese vendors. They're the people who are asking about emergency access to things like HathiTrust. I know for me as a medievalist, things like the prefectural histories are really essential. And one of the most frustrating things in the past has actually been that there's no searchability of them in any kind of way. And the indexes are not great if they exist at all. And actually now, because of the emergency access to HathiTrust, I have actually a lot more capabilities than I did previously for my research because of the pandemic. So I think that we'll have to really consider what our relationships with people in Japan look like, and how important our librarians are and how we can support them as these critical intermediaries in order to continue our research if lockdown continues in the way that it has. So that's my response, at least to the research question. I don't know if James has anything to add to that as someone in Japan presently.
Things kind of did come to a stop in some areas for me, but there's also a lot of projects have sort of grown out of the sort of lockdown situation. But I find most of them are not based in Japan. So the summer school, which I participated in, that was one example of something which sort of grew out of the lockdown experience. And I'm involved in another project at the University of Cambridge, which is transcribing Edo period texts which focus on pandemics in Japanese history. And I'm seeing a lot of those sorts of projects springing up, but not many of them from within Japan. Most of them I'm seeing in the UK or in North America. So I guess that's how I would address the first question, just to answer that. Yeah. Wonderful.
As for the second question, I think that how to find collaboration is really individual based on not only your sort of personal preference for how to connect to people, but also where your communities are. I've had a lot of networking and collaboration community engagement that's happened through Twitter, but also through mailing lists. For me, it's PMJS, the Pre-Modern Japanese Studies mailing list. If it's digital studies, I've tried to address this on my DH Japan wiki. We have a database where you can add yourself as a scholar or look for collaborators and see what kind of things that people are doing. But again, this requires your input, and it's very hard to get people to participate in things and submit their own information. So I would say that if you do want to collaborate with someone, or you're interested in finding out where you should go for different collaborations, the best thing you can do is communicate with people and ask those questions. And nobody will think less of you for emailing them and asking them a question because you're just starting out. And I think that it's a terrifying thing to do, to email strangers and get their advice. But it's sort of one of the things that you just have to get used to in academia, because if you don't reach out and make that personal connection with someone and learn about these things that maybe are not as public as they should be or well known as they could be, then you find yourself kind of stuck and feeling like you don't know what to do. And so I think that's also why part of the public facing work that James and I are trying to do is so important, because we're hoping to kind of alleviate some of those anxieties and give you a starting point from which you can make those connections.
I'm with you 100% on that. I think social media is a really important forum for networking. I mean, that's how you and I know each other.
Yeah.
And how I asked you to write for Digital Orientalist, and how I've connected with other people to write for Digital Orientalist. And basically how I know everyone involved in the digital humanities is all through Twitter. It's how I know Simon as well. So I think social media is a really powerful tool.
This is actually the first time all of us have met face to face, but we have all been Twitter mutuals for a long time.
Yeah, yeah. And then I don't use Facebook personally, but I know people who are really sort of connected in the academic world on Facebook. So one of our editors at Digital Orientalist, Ephraim, who is our Syriac Studies editor, earlier this year, he published a piece where he'd found an old Syriac manuscript thanks to a Facebook post by a colleague of his. And he's having another post, I think, next week, which is also going to look at how Facebook helped him make another discovery. So we're meant to be talking about collaboration, sorry. But yeah, social media, I think, is a really great way to connect with people. And another site I would recommend is HNet, is really useful I've found quite useful for connecting with other scholars.
I think that's all really incredibly helpful. And one thing that we're going to be looking at with our new cohort of interdisciplinary Japanese studies master's students over the coming year is to, and also hopefully through the Facebook group that we've set up for the online summer program, is to see how we can be facilitating further networking between especially groups of students, actually. So that would be lovely to get some networking going on between our master's students and MA students in Japanese studies elsewhere, but also in particular with our PhD students and early careers researchers, because especially with the PhD experience anyway can be pretty isolating. And if you can't get out and about to meet your colleagues, which has been restricted over the summer, we need to be being as imaginative as possible to do that. So we're looking to put together a few online projects in this regard over the coming year. And as I say, it'd be wonderful to be collaborating with, so we couldn't have two better people to be collaborating with on that, I think, as we develop those ideas. So I think with that, we'd probably better draw this part of our webinar to a close. I would just like to say once again a huge thank you to Paula and to James for joining us at the far ends of the day, as I say. We very much hope, we look forward to continuing this discussion. Digital humanities is a big area for the University of East Anglia. We have it as one of our nascent areas of research expertise, we have a digital humanities manager, and we've got a digital humanities archaeologist historian colleague who's very much involved in this too. So I know that across the university there's great interest in this, and I see it's a potentially inevitably of increasing significance, and we're going to be needing to adapt and to respond and to lead on the opportunities that I think are presenting themselves now. So thank you both very much indeed, and hope you can hear the round of applause for you both from Norwich anyway, across the digital waves. And you're very welcome to stay with us for the last 20 minutes or so and meet some of my other colleagues. Thank you on behalf of all of us and all of our audience for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. So we're now going to turn to the second part of our webinar, which is jiko shokai. It's a very rapid fire self-introduction by some of our academic members of the Centre for Japanese Studies here at the University of East Anglia. We're running about 10 minutes late at the moment, but that's fine as long as we all stick to our 2-minute slots from now on in. And I'm just going to compress what was going to be the final 10 minutes into a final 1 minute gabble through a couple of last bits of information I want to put out. I'm going to hand us first over over to, I'm hoping we've got Dr. Eugenia Bogdanova-Kummer, who is our lecturer in Japanese art and cultural studies at the Centre Institute for the Study of Japanese Arts and Cultures, and is also leading on our new MA in Interdisciplinary Japanese Studies. Eugenia.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Simon. Thank you, everybody who joined us today. You basically introduced me already, so yes, my name is Eugenia Bogdanova-Kummer. I'm a lecturer in Japanese arts and cultural heritage at the Sainsbury Institute and also at UEA. And I also happen to be course director for the new MA in Interdisciplinary Japanese Studies. And it's everything that we've been talking about today really resonates with what we're trying to do on the course. So we're really trying to incorporate digital insights from the digital knowledge and this shift to the online research communities into the curriculum and into the way how students learn. I think we have a couple of students with us today, so I hope they can agree that that's the case. I also, last year, I was co-organizing the summer schools, which last year took place, as a normal format, face-to-face. We had a wonderful international bunch of students of, I think, 20 participants from all over the world, really, from the United States, from Canada, from Japan, from China, and many places in Europe. So seeing that format being transformed into online program this year is really exciting, and it's also a really different transformative experience for all of us involved. So I think it was great to be part of that, and I hope we can continue doing what we're doing and next year have or the same successful program, either in whichever format we will have it. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Eugenia. Moving swiftly on, I'd like to introduce Dr. Raina Dennison, who is film studies specialist and working in particular on Japanese film in UEA. Raina.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me, Simon. Can you all see me, I hope? Hi. I'm Dr. Raina Dennison. I'm a senior lecturer in film, television, and media studies, and I'm also the head of department for film, television, and media studies at UEA. I am a specialist in contemporary Japanese film and animation, as Simon says, and I am currently writing an industrial history of Studio Ghibli for my research fun times. I'm hoping that these sorts of events will help us all reach out. And I was really struck by what the speakers today were saying about how a lot of what we do in academia is based on personal networks. And I'm struck by the fact that I do a lot of talks and things online and in person whenever possible. And one of the joys of that is when people get in touch with you afterwards. So if you would like to have a chat about anything to do with Japanese film or animation, do get in touch. Lovely to meet you all. And I'm late to teach, so I will go and say hello and goodbye. Bye now.
Thank you very much, Raina. That is absolutely brilliant. Nadine, Dr. Nadine Willems is one of our two lecturers in Japanese history.
Okay, you can hear me, I think now. So I'm Nadine Willems. I'm from Belgium originally. I've been at UEA as a lecturer in modern Japanese history since 2016. And this is in fact my second career, because before that, for many years, I was a journalist and foreign correspondent in Tokyo. And then I came back and I got my PhD from Oxford University in history. And what are my interests? My interests are early 20th century transnational connections between Japan and Europe. Particularly, I'm interested in agrarian movements, in anarchism, in the politics of dissent. I've got my first monograph, which is out right now in intellectual history, and it's a biographical study of Ishikawa Sanshiro, who was an anarchist in the early 20th century and traveled to Europe in the 13th to 1920. But I'm also interested in Japanese poetry and translation of poetry. And my latest project is about the translation and exploration of a diary from a Japanese soldier who went to Siberia during the Siberian intervention in 1920. So I hope to meet everyone in the MA, of course, and everyone else involved and associated to Japanese studies. But most of all, I'm very pleased to be associated with CISJAC and the members of the Center for Japanese Studies. I'm really impressed by how thrilling everything is developing at the moment. So thank you to everyone.
Thank you, Nadine, and congratulations on the publication of your new book, which I'm looking forward to reading when the copy arrives on my desk. I think I've got one on order at the moment, so very much looking forward to that. Moving on, we're going to turn now to Dr. Hannah Osborne, who is our lecturer in Japanese literature at UEA.
And just one last thing, I also have to rush off, sadly, but thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Nadine, and thank you, Simon. Actually, I'm having problems starting my video. I'm getting a message saying that the host has stopped my video. So I don't know whether there's anything your end, Simon, you can do to, there we go. Ah. Thanks very much. Hello, everyone. Very nice to meet you all. I'm Hannah Osborne. I'm the Japan Foundation lecturer in Japanese literature. I joined UEA in January this year. Previously, I took my MA in Japanese literature at SOAS, the University of London. And I then went on to do a Monbu Kagakusho research a couple of years at Waseda University and studied with Chiba Shunji, the Tanizaki scholar, and Kanai Keiko, who's a specialist in gender and Japanese literature. And I then came back to the UK and completed a PhD on the early writings of Kanai Mieko, who was a young writer who debuted in the late 1960s. And I contextualize her writings very much within the Japanese avant-garde at the time. Since completing my PhD, I have then gone on to teach at SOAS and at Oxford and Cambridge universities before arriving here. And at present, I am now, I have been preparing my module in Japanese literature for the MA, which I'm very excited about. Our first class is on Monday morning. This, I think, so far is going to be conducted entirely online. As part of my work for the UEA, I've also been working alongside my colleagues in the LDC as a digital champion, which means we've been trying to help facilitate the moving of all materials, teaching materials, to online teaching, just in case we go into another severe lockdown, which doesn't seem to be the case at the moment. But we just want to give ourselves the option of being able to do that. So that's been at sometimes a fraught, but also a very interesting process and steep learning curve for me. And that's all really. I'm currently continuing research on Kanai. Yeah, I think that's all I need to say. Very nice to see the talks today on online teaching, something I'm very interested in, and it's all very exciting, I think, in terms of Japanese studies and its future. So I look forward to meeting you all soon. Thank you very much, Simon.
Thank you very much indeed, Hannah. That's absolutely brilliant. And we were going to be joined by another couple of our colleagues, but unfortunately, due to various reasons, they can't be with us. That's Dr. Eriko Tomizawa-Kei, who teaches Japanese, but is a distinguished art historian of Japan in her own right, and Dr. Sherdod Muminov, who's actually teaching right now, who's our other lecturer in Japanese history, who specializes in particular on Russo-Japanese relations in the 20th century. So we'll find other opportunities to bring them to our virtual audiences, I hope. But what we do have is a short recorded introduction from Dr. Ra Mason, our Sasakawa lecturer in Japanese international relations and foreign policy. So Ollie, perhaps we can share the screen and bring on Ra.
Hello, my name is Ra Mason and I am Sasakawa Lecturer in International Relations and Japanese Foreign Policy at the School of Politics, Philosophy, Language and Communication Studies. And on the MA in Interdisciplinary Japanese Studies, I will be teaching a module on the foreign relations of China and Japan in the modern world. So this is a module which looks really at Japan's transition through 200 years and more of feudal society, closed country, and revolution and restoration, leading to the modern, prosperous nation state that ultimately we see today. And for many other areas of Japanese foreign policy, and certainly for the international relations of Japan and the region more broadly, I'm probably your first port of call at this university. If you'd like to know more about what I research and write on, then please either take a look at the people pages of the school PPL, or if you'd like to read something a little less heavy going, particularly on Okinawa, on Japan-Korea relations, or on Japan's leadership, then check out The Conversation UK under Ra Mason. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Ra. And again, we look forward to seeing you in person or live in the near future as well. So that's the university side of our Centre for Japanese Studies. The Sainsbury Institute for the Study of Japanese Arts and Cultures has a massive cohort of people working on Japanese visual cultures, material culture, art, archaeology and cultural heritage. We have three of our key colleagues with us who are going to introduce themselves now, who in many ways have been behind our online programs. I'm going to introduce them in this order. It'll be Oliver Moxham to start with, and then Chris Hayes and Ryoko Matsuba, without whom we wouldn't have been able to deliver our online summer program in Japanese cultural studies at all. So going to start with Ollie Moxham. Oliver.
Thank you, Simon. Hello, everyone. My name is Oliver Moxham. I'm the Project Support Officer at CISJAC and the Centre for Japanese Studies. Some of you may recognize me from moderating the online summer program, and some of you may recognize my voice from hosting the Beyond Japan podcast series. I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome the new MA students to UEA. I'll be your point of contact for any general queries relating to Japanese studies, so do feel free to get in touch with me. I also manage the CJS websites, japaninnorwich.org, where all events and updates will be shared. Please do take a look, as we aim to bring you the latest information and research in Japanese studies in one convenient site. Finally, we have our first Beyond Japan episode of the semester. It just came out today, where I discussed the future of Sino-Japanese relations following Shinzo Abe's resignation with Dr. Giulio Pugliese of Oxford University. So do please check it out on our website and stay tuned for weekly updates. Thank you. Back to you, Simon.
Thank you very much, Ollie. That's brilliant. And thank you for overseeing this whole webinar today and for helping it all run so very smoothly. I'm now going to move on to Dr. Christopher Hayes.
Hi. Hello, everyone. Yes, I'm Christopher Hayes. I'm Academic Associate and Japanese Projects Assistant at the Sainsbury Institute. A few of you who were on the program may remember me. I wasn't sort of on camera as much as Ollie. I was sort of behind the scenes, making sure the website ran. I was there responding to your emails if you ever had any problems. Others of you might recognize my name at the very least in the past, where I may have engaged with some of you online for academic purposes, although never met in person. Or some students may know me through some work I do for the Great Britain Sasakawa Foundation, where I'm alumni coordinator. I have a PhD from Cardiff University, and my area of expertise is representation of Japan in contemporary British media, conceptions of Japan and its culture. Until March, I was based at the Kyoto Institute Library and Archives, where I was conducting research on the Rugby World Cup and tourist perceptions and experiences of Japan. Since then, I've been at the Sainsbury Institute working on various projects. And as I say, I was responsible for designing and helping to run this online summer program. So I think it went very well and just had some fantastic experiences. So I'll turn back to Simon now.
Thank you, Chris. And yes, thank you indeed for all that you did for the summer program and also continuing to do for many of our CISJAC and Centre for Japanese Studies projects. Last but not least in this roll call of honor in terms of our Japanese work here in Norwich is Dr. Ryoko Matsuba.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep,
Yes,
we can hear
thank
you.
you. Thank you so much. So, hello, I'm Ryoko Matsuba. I'm Senior Digital Humanities Officer at Sainsbury Institute, and also I'm visiting researcher at the British Museum and Ritsumeikan University to conduct some of number of digitization projects in museums in UK, Europe, and US. And recently, I was a curatorial member of Hokusai exhibition 2017 and manga exhibition in last year. So that's just back to 2004. I joined the Digital Humanities project at Ritsumeikan, and Professor Henry Smith said the term digital humanities would disappear in the future because everybody can use a digital technique. But now we still have the term digital humanities, but probably the means of digital humanities has been changed. And this year, because of the pandemic, the online summer program gave us a great idea how to use digital resources. So we are very much looking forward to developing this idea with our MA student. And I haven't met everybody, but really look forward to meeting you all sometime soon. So back to Simon. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryoko, and thank you everybody for those wonderful introductions. And once again, thank you very much to James and Paula for setting the scene of what we might be trying to do with taking Japanese studies online. So there were just a few other things I wanted to say before we wrap up. The first is to encourage you all, please do take a look at the report on the online Japanese studies program that we've prepared. It will be online, and the link I think will be circulated very shortly. We'd greatly appreciate any feedback on that. We're now proactively thinking about what we're going to be offering next summer 2021. We would dearly love to be able to bring students back to Norwich, obviously in person. We just don't know whether that's going to be possible at the moment, but by the end of October, we'll have made some decisions. What we do know is that certainly at the late July, early August 2021, we'll be running a program that, even if it's just online, will be something building on the successes of what we did this summer. So watch out for announcements about that. And we very much hope that all of our participants in that summer program will continue to engage with us through the Facebook group and in other ways as well. As was mentioned earlier, all of those participants created wonderful Pechakucha style presentations, brief presentations about their own research. And we were hoping to see some of those within this hour, but we're out of time for that. But we're going to have a link to some of those on the website as well. So do take the time to look at them. We found them absolutely inspirational. And I think we've got a selection of the very best ones that we're going to suggest you take a look at. The last thing I wanted to say really was that we've reconfigured our Centre for Japanese Studies a little bit this year, partly because of moving online, but because of the pandemic, a whole load of different factors. We've reconfigured what was our web presence for the Centre for Japanese Studies as well. So the UEA website, you'll find just a landing page for the centre, and then we've created a new website, which we've got the URL of www.japaninnorwich.org, and I do encourage you to pay regular visits to that site, as well as to the website for the Sainsbury Institute, where we post lots of our research findings and details of events that we've got coming up. We will be running these online Centre for Japanese Studies interdisciplinary webinars on a regular basis. We're hoping to have at least one a month, and we'll be posting more details about that, probably around about, like today, the first Thursday of each month, I believe, is what we're looking at. So we'll certainly have one in November, one in December. And of course, I can't end before I draw your attention to the fact that the Sainsbury Institute also has a very regular online lecture series, our third Thursday lectures, now online. And the next one of those will be on October the 13th, Thursday, October the 13th. And that is Dr. Ming Chiam-po, who will be speaking to us about the Gutai group of contemporary Japanese artists. So we hope that you will all be able to join us for that. And we look forward to seeing you at our next Centre for Japanese Studies event. Thank you very much for joining us, and I wish you all a very good afternoon. Thank you and goodbye.